Are you struggling to come up with original content week in and week out? Start a podcast. Interview your ideal clients, let them talk about what they care about most, and never run out of content ideas again. Learn more at sweetfishmedia.com.
You're listening to B2B Growth, a daily podcast for B2B leaders. We've interviewed names you've probably heard before, like Gary Vaynerchuk and Simon Sinek, but you've probably never heard from the majority of our guests. That's because the bulk of our interviews aren't with professional speakers and authors. Most of our guests are in the trenches leading sales and marketing teams. They're implementing strategy. They're experimenting with tactics. They're building the fastest growing B2B companies in the world. My name is James Carberry. I'm the founder of Sweetfish Media, a podcast agency for B2B brands, and I'm also one of the co-hosts of this show. When we're not interviewing sales and marketing leaders, you'll hear stories from behind the scenes of our own business. We'll share the ups and downs of our journey as we attempt to take over the world. Just kidding. Well, maybe. Let's get into the show.
All right, guys, we'd like to welcome Jake Joranstaad to the show. Jake is the CEO of Bushel, based in Fargo, North Dakota. And I'm really excited today because Jake sells to an interesting market. I think we talk a lot about high tech, and we talk a lot about, these different markets that we are targeting or selling to or marketing. And this one in particular is a different animal, but we can actually learn a lot of interesting things from it. He and I were talking before the show. So Jake, why don't you give us a little introduction into what you all do there at Bushel and who you're selling to today?
Hey, thanks for having me on, Rex. Yeah, so grew up in North Dakota. If you're from the Midwest or know people from the Midwest, agriculture is pretty deep in our roots. And, growing up around the farm, a lot of the team here at Bushel has been on the farm growing up. We realized there's this big opportunity in agriculture. In particular, we think the supply chain side of agriculture. So not maybe on-farm technologies, but what happens next when a farmer produces a product, a good, their crop. From that point forward, what's being done in technology? And we saw this big gap. A lot of stuff being done in that world pretty much from the 90s, right out of the 90s today. It doesn't look a whole lot different than it did 20 years ago. And so that's where Bushel came to be. And we had this idea that maybe we could figure out how to connect the farmer and their local co-op or elevator or ethanol plant or mill processing plant, where they sell their product from the farm to that company, that agribusiness, and help them do better business together, where there was this missing piece where it was just phone calls and paper. In the past, you'd bring your truckload of grain into the elevator, you deliver it, and you get this receipt like you would get at a grocery store.
Yep.
And the thing is, though, that for a farmer, that those receipts are a vast majority of their revenue for the year is coming from their deliveries. And there was no digital way to receive a receipt. There was no digital way to go out and proactively get that information for your farm. And so you were making decisions on stacks of paper that may have been in the back of the room. Maybe your contracts from 6 months ago, they're somewhere back in your office. But, how do I get information that matters when we're right in the middle of the season? So that's what Bushel came to be. So we've automated the data from the elevator to the farmer through a mobile product called Bushel. And each elevator gets their own brand. And we go out and we sell to the elevator. So a lot of people, when we talk about agriculture and technology, you're selling to the farmer. In our case, we sell to the agribusiness, the elevator, their general manager, who has a profile a lot like a farmer. Sometimes they are farmers and they run the business. So we kind of have both situations. But really, that's where it's a B2B sale. It's direct to these companies. They make a company decision or a co-op, maybe a board meeting decision to buy Bushel for their elevator. And that's the business that we're in.
Well, and I love this. I think this is a very interesting market, and what you're learning there can be applied very broadly. So one thing that we talked about before the show is that there's a big push in business today to be international, to be global, to be digital, to be separate. But what you wanted to talk about today was the idea of shaking someone's hand and what that means for a business. Why does that still matter? Why don't you break some of that down for us?
Yeah. And of course, thinking about in-person meetings and shaking hands and meeting people, it seems old school. And of course, agriculture is a little bit more old school that way. I still think it's 100% applicable across B2B, kind of wherever you are. So we think it matters. Thinking about Bushel, majority of our sales have had at least an in-person meeting. Some of them we've been able to close without ever meeting team. We've done video calls, presenting the product and demo over video chat. That's all good, but what we've learned is sometimes what wins us the deal over a competitor is being in person, being willing to come out and meet people, even if it's just one time. So we believe heavily in that. You and I could talk a little bit about this, but I think there's some ways to do it right where you're not overdoing it and having to spend all this time and money traveling. A lot of companies, as they're trying to scale, you might have a good travel budget, but you can't afford to go to every meeting in person. So there's got to be a balance there of how to make that meeting valuable. A lot of times we only have one in-person meeting if they're not in our immediate area, but we'll do one in-person meeting that will turn out to be really valuable.
Now, and I think the risk here is that we'll think of every time we want to have that one meeting, right? Let's say we're just going to pick one meeting in the sales process. We are going to make it that closing meeting, right? Where we come in hot and heavy. We're ready for signatures. How do you pick which meeting you choose to be in person? Because if you're being careful about your budget, or really also being cautious of the other person's time, right? Like you don't want to take up their time, in person, there, more significant contribution of time from each party. So how do you choose which meeting you schedule in person?
Yeah. So what we've learned, I think so far is, and we've been doing this for about 2 years in the product with Bushel, we've got about 60 companies who've signed on. So we've done this 60 times,
sure,
at least. What we find is that if you go in the early part of the sales process, if you're in person, unless it's just dropping in, which I could share about how we kind of do that around maybe another more important meeting, it seems like you spend a ton of time trying to do something that you could have done in an email and one call, and you'll never get to the close on that first meeting. It's pretty unlikely. And even if the meeting goes really well and you've never met them before, but they're so excited about the product, you still don't close very fast. It still takes that time. They got to go through their decision process. You might have won some internal, resources onto your team saying, hey, we want to get this, but it doesn't make the closing happen any sooner by going early. So what we do is we set up, a call. Obviously, we're probably our initial call, reaching out, or an email, get it set up. Ideally, we've done a demo to some stakeholder, just one ahead of time, where they're bought into the product, they get it. And what happens in an in-person meeting is it's viewed as a little bit more important when a company's coming from out of town. So for us, we're coming from Fargo to somewhere else in the Midwest or on the East or West Coast in agriculture, mostly Pacific Northwest for us is where we're at when we're doing out there. They'll bring in more people into the meeting. So they're going to bring in people that you haven't met yet. So you can't really prep them. But what you need is your internal advocate for at the company you're trying to sell to needs to be bought in and wanting to push this product. And that person will prep them. They'll tell them how excited they are about this company that's coming in. And if you have that coming into that, maybe if you call it the closing meeting, maybe it's kind of the middle of the sales cycle. You come in, now you've got somebody who's championed it internally, and you meet, and you're presenting to some people who've never seen it before, but they're already sort of having this bias towards, hey, this is probably a good thing for us. That's way better than starting from, we don't believe it, we don't even know who you are or what you're here for, and trying to run a meeting that way. So that's how we do it. And from there, thinking about making those meetings effective, we'll set up that meeting ahead of time as maybe it's the middle of the sales process. We'll set it up, and then we'll make that our base meeting and move other meetings around it. So we'll have bookends to that meeting. Maybe we'll do a couple drop-ins to prospects on the way there for driving or flying in and having to drive somewhere. A lot of times in the Midwest, of course, you land in the airport and you still have to drive 6 hours to get to
Sure.
And then, on the other side of that meeting, maybe we'll do a couple of drop-ins to customers we might already have, and just shaking hands. And obviously in agriculture, these guys care about relationships. We believe the relationship between the farmer and their customer and the company they do business with is important. So for us to be there, shake a hand, and even leave something behind, that's important for us to do.
Today's growth story is all about search engine marketing. The company we're highlighting is SentinelOne. This challenger cybersecurity brand was set out to disrupt the endpoint protection space. Their brand was top-notch, their product was innovative, but they were struggling to gain traction online in an already developed industry. Then they found Directive Consulting, a B2B search marketing agency. Within the first quarter of working with Directive, SentinelOne was able to increase their organic traffic by 128% and overall lead volume by an outstanding 251%. Now, I have a hunch that Directive can get these kind of results for you too. So head over to directiveconsulting.com and request a totally free custom proposal. That's directiveconsulting.com. All right, let's get back to this interview.
Yeah. So something I wanted to draw out there that you mentioned was that you use, you get this very important meeting that you've set in stone. Basically, you've got this anchor meeting, and then you put the meetings around it. Yeah. So you've got, and the bookends. I really like that idea of, okay, let's take what could be an inefficient use of time, very effective use of time, we'll say, but what could be seen as inefficient use of time, and let's make it more efficient. Let's say, okay, we're driving from Fargo to this place. How many stops along the way? And you mentioned before the recording here that both prospects and customers. And so that idea of the additional, in-person touch, look, we may not spend 4 hours together because I'm headed to another meeting that is going to be a little bit longer and it's further away. That seems like a very important thing to mention as we look at how do we make these the most efficient use of our time. So, I love that. That's great.
So thinking about that, just to play on that point. So another thing that happens when you drop into a prospect and you're saying, hey, I'm here for another meeting, they know it may be a competitor or at least somebody down the road that's looking at this seriously.
Sure.
So now they're like, oh, I'm interested too. It's kind of this fear of missing out, this FOMO syndrome of, wow, you're here for another meeting. And then, on the other side, dropping into the company. Sometimes they're just really happy to see somebody that they're working with, and they'll tell you some great feedback. Usually you can collect in a meeting with a current customer. You just drop in, say hi. And for us, we like to leave something behind, share a little bit about this idea that we have with beer. So in agriculture, beer is a pretty important thing for farmers, for these guys. First off, we produce it in egg, and obviously we love consuming it. So what we did was we went to our local craft beer company, which anybody could do this, and they have a pretty big canning operation. And we worked with them. We designed a label, a Bushel company label that we did about 300 cases of labels. And then we can make a run whenever we ask them. They'll kind of plan out a run of beers, and we won't do too much at once, but maybe a few hundred cans we just did recently. And we have them little 6-packs, and we can't ship them, which is annoying. It would be great to be able to ship a 6-pack to every customer that comes on. But what we'll do is we'll throw them in the cooler in the car, and we'll be driving to a meeting, and we'll just drop that 6-pack of Bushel branded Fargo Brewing Company beer at the location, maybe leave some sales material behind if it's a prospect. If it's somebody we already know, hey, just drop your card off, make sure they have your information after they've bought the product, and they've got a 6-pack to have after work. So that just makes a huge impact. I did it this weekend on a family trip. I just dropped into a potential customer and left a 6-pack, and they'll send a tweet out about it. They'll have a picture. Hey, Bushel dropped off some beer for us. The whole team gets excited about that. So that's something that we do that I think really makes a huge impact. Even if it means nothing to the actual product, it makes a difference in the relationship.
Yeah, I think this is great that you're mentioning some things that not only help you stand out, but help you to maximize every minute, every ounce, every fluid ounce of the trip, right? That you can get the most out of this thing so that you don't have to look at it as a waste of your time, or just, if this deal doesn't close, then I did nothing on this whole trip. And there's a lot that happens in between when you leave and when you get back home. I think that's really impressive and a wise bit of advice for those who are listening. So, Jake, this has been great. If there's anywhere that people can find you online, I'm sure they would love to hear more about what you guys are doing today. Where can we find you?
Yeah, we've got our website for Bushel is bushel.ag, bushel.ag. That's the latest and greatest on what's going on with the product and who's got it. If you're a farmer and you're listening to this, ask your local elevator about Bushel. That's kind of how you can learn more about it. They might have it. They might be buying it from us soon. And that's a little bit more about where you can find information on us, and you can just reach out from there.
Very good. All right, Jake, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me, Rex. Appreciate it.
Becoming a thought leader doesn't just happen. If you want to build a strong personal brand and extend your reach online and offline, you need a plan. Want help developing yours? Check out Impact Summit. This one-day event is bringing together best-selling authors, professional athletes, influential CEOs, and emerging entrepreneurs, all for one purpose: to equip you to lead, influence, and inspire. Whether you're looking to build a lasting legacy with your business or extend the reach of your brand, Impact Summit speakers will share inspiring stories and practical lessons to help you on your way. Did we mention a session on launching and growing a podcast? You guessed it, you'll hear from Sweetfish Media's own James Carberry during that session. You won't want to miss all of these influencers and leaders coming together in Salt Lake City on October 13th. Ready to learn more? Check out influencerinc.co/Impact Summit. B2B Growth listeners can get 15% off the price of their tickets for this event by using the promo code SWEETFISH, SWEETFISH. So use that code, get your tickets today, and get ready to grow your brand and your influence at Impact Summit 2018.